Hi! I was packing my notebooks because I collect them for fun and also use plenty of them in my daily life. And I discovered this. It's the daytime journal that I used in the year 2016. And that was the year where I had a lot of creative discoveries and experiments with various people, some of who are now my dear friends and artists who I admire greatly. That year, I also had interesting, strange relationships with various people that opened up discoveries about myself and the possibilities of humaning that I didn't realize was possible until then. In terms of learning and like professional life, that was also the year that I first encountered the Alexander technique, which I found the notes of over here, which is why I wanted to make this video. As I was looking through this book, I saw my reflections on my vocal goals that I had for the longer term, my practice journal to get better in musicking and voice work, some rehearsal and show notes from me being an audience. I have no idea what show it was though, because I didn't write the date nor the company. And also some reflections on what pedagogy and teaching means to me, amongst other things. But the topic of this video is me reacting to my notes from the very first Alexander Technique lesson I ever had. It's really significant to me because back then, I didn't realize that we could learn about our body and mind in such a specific yet open way. Maybe I should talk about like what AT is, right? Before I jump in. Okay, I'll leave that to a future me because I don't want to get too like thinky today. I just want to respond to this. Long story short, the Alexander technique is an approach to learning about your body and mind through developing awareness and observational skills, and then understanding how you can do a certain activity with more ease, freedom, and less pain and discomfort. How it was developed was this guy called F.M. Alexander in the late 1800s was performing a lot and doing adaptations of Shakespearean plays. And he realized that every time he was on stage for 10 to 20 minutes, he kept losing his voice that magically went away a day or two later. So he went to voice teachers and doctors to find out what happened, and all of them told him nothing's wrong with your voice, just take some vocal rest before you go on stage. So he took periods of vocal rest, even sometimes 1 to 2 weeks, yet whenever he went on stage, he kept losing his voice. And then he was really frustrated because the professionals could not help him, which was when he decided to take things into his own hands and he was like, heck, I'm gonna observe myself in the mirror and then make notes on little patterns and habits that I discover in the way that I use my voice and use my body to go into vocalization. From there, he discovered a bunch of things that eventually evolved into the principles of Alexander technique, as well as approaches within the technique that people can bring into their own lives. So, AT teachers would train to use hands-on guidance, verbal directions and feedback, as well as other types of awareness building exercises to help someone embody a more healthful and efficient state of being when they do things in life. It can be adapted to things like typing on a computer, using your phone, walking, sitting and standing, some of which I'll talk about later in this video. Okay, that's the TLDR. So now back to the main video and my notes from my very first session. Anyway, so in this very first session, a lady called Andrea Baiocchi from no, the Hochschule für Musik in Berlin came to our school and gave us 1 hour individual sessions where I got to work on my voice with her and she worked with me in AT. So let's look at my notes and see what happened. These are the notes I made after the first session, where Andrea got me to lie in semi-supine on a table, I think, and then walk me through the basics of Alexander technique, and then gave me some hands-on feedback. The very first note I made was back, long and wide, extending back like a rectangle, which probably refers to one of the primary directions that we go through in Alexander technique. The first being head forward and up, and then the second one back long and wide. Sorry, I made a mistake here. I left out the actual first primary direction, which is neck free. Second one is head forward and up or forward and away. And the third one is back long and wide. I was probably confused because the three trainings I went to from 2019 to 2024 did not focus so much on the primary direction, so much as the distillations of its principles, which I'll talk about later on in the video as well. Why these were the key directions that Alexander created or came up with was because for him, when he was going through his voice loss period, he realized that he had a tendency to tuck like this before he started vocalizing. So the head forward and up direction is to create an opposition to his habit. And long and wide was because he saw that for himself, he had not only done this, but also started shortening his stature, which then, if you can hear my voice, actually there's a bit of a change, just like contraction and pushing sound. And that just created a lot more tension and less ease and resonance for him as a stage performer who needed his voice. So back long and wide was something that came from his experience that people then adapted into the classical Alexander directions. It's not always necessarily useful for everyone, because what if you are someone who already hoists yourself up this way and then there's more of this secondary curve going on through your whole spine? Long and wide might not be the most useful. Although some AT teachers might be like, long means this. So even like that, you can release into long on a vertical plane as opposed to one that brings you more posteriorly into this secondary curve. Yeah, cool stuff. Extending back like a rectangle. That's such a fun imagery. This is not from the classical directions, but obviously we can use languaging to create new awareness and proprioceptive connections. Like a rectangle. I wonder if I meant like this way or like this way. I imagine it's this way, which probably helps to open up the backspace more and create more like ease in my shoulders. I'll be curious what that gave me of then. Okay, next one is space between vertebrae and skull. 3 points of contact. Oh, probably talking about the connection between the skull and the tip top of your spine, where they call the atlanto-occipital joint. 3 points of contact. Wow. I mean, that is anatomically correct from the atlas and the occiput, but wow, it feels very narrowing with my current understanding when I think of 3 points of contact. Maybe that was to give me a sense of how little contact there was. I don't know. I wonder why that was something I felt useful to write down. But anyway, whew. Our skull carries our brain and other juicy things, and it's really heavy. I think is it 10 to 12 pounds? I think that's the numbers. And our tip top of spine meets the base of the skull such that the weight of your skull can pour through your whole self and be supported by various other parts of your body. So I think 3 points of contact is not the most useful thing. It might be factual-ish, but it's important to remember that that then extends into the rest of your body. Okay, next one. Let arm and shoulder hang and be heavy. Ooh. Again, I wonder what that did for past me. Let and be heavy. Cause when I think of that now, oof, it feels like it's pulling down my shoulders rather than like letting them go. Hmm. For me now, how I would phrase it differently would be like, notice where your arm is connected to your torso, which, fun fact, it's like all the way over here where your clavicles meet the top of your sternum, such that if you move your arm like this and then even further, you're gonna feel it move. So to remember that your arm structure is this much, and then just letting the weight of your arm pour through your body. which from this note and be heavy, I think that's what I was trying to convey. Hopefully it was useful for me back then, because definitely that session for me was very, very, very great. Number 4, sitting down, think up. Oh, okay. So in Alexander technique, right, we work a lot with sitting and standing as the primary movement laboratory to discover our habits of movement. Some of us might, for example, brace a little bit before we shift our weight onto our legs when we come into standing. Or when sitting down, we might actually plonk downwards because of the word down and sitting down. So in this note, think up is to create this awareness of the opposition forces that are available to you even when most of your body is moving downwards. What this means is that you encourage your legs. I wish I could stand. I didn't frame it in a way I could stand. Your legs could continue to be part of the movement of arriving on the chair without having to just boom down this way, without using momentum to get there. In such a way, thinking up allows you to have more ease to come into sitting instead of forcing your way into sitting. What this does in the long term is to allow your various joints to be more responsive and supple, and also to create more buoyancy in yourself when you move from position to position. It's a long story short. There's so much we can go into that I wish I had thought about to set up the camera. I didn't really think about how long I'm gonna spend talking about this. Maybe until I'm like bored or tired. Okay, number 5. Let it let. Don't try to change it. That's a nice phrasing. In the AT world, there's this talk of non doingness, which means to let your desire or wish to do whatever you want to do to come through without trying so hard physically to get it to work. Because, for example, in voice work, right, if I want to do a mid range tone when I sing, let's say, E, and I want to create a louder sound, right? If I didn't let it let, I might want to go, E. I push my way through with the localized muscles here and even like a little bit more here. If I thought about letting it let, letting the loudness go through my body, there's a bit more receptivity in my neck muscles, in my lats. And let's go for a louder sound by letting it let. Which creates more resonance. Obviously, this isn't the most useful cue. It has to come in conjunction with um, an embodied and experiential way of learning. Probably what happened back then was I came with like certain hand stuff and then I discovered something, and then Andrea might have said, let it let. And I was like, oh, that's such a nice, like, easeful way of doing it. Let me see if I want to continue with this bit because I have like 4 more points. Think of unknowns. Nah, I'm bored of this. Let's go on to the next section, sorry. I ask myself, what is my bad habit? Wow. And the second follow up is, how do I fix it? Man. I'm sighing because AT as an approach is passive in the sense of the more you try, the more you're going to reinforce your habits of doing the thing. And sometimes cognitively, we might feel that identifying the habit and saying how to fix it is going to be more useful. But if we're really using the philosophy of AT, it's to inhibit, meaning to pause at the moment before your habit comes in, and to invite the possibility of a new way of doing it. what does this mean, right? What the heck? All these strange jargon. I personally don't like when people saying jargon, so let's try to break it down. Okay, so let's say I can't use my phone. Okay, never mind. Let's say this is my phone. Okay. If I'm very used to holding my phone tightly in order to type, that's gonna create a lot of tension over here in the long run, which is not sustainable. And anyway, we shouldn't be doom scrolling for 3 hours on end, but that's beside the point. If we were to think about what is my bad habit, it would be like, oh, to clamp on very tightly. How do I fix it? To release the tension? But how do you release the tension, right? So an AT teacher might guide you to be like, oh, notice the space between your fingertips and the edge of your elbow. Notice how long this part of your body is and how much softness there is in your arm. And in this opening up of your sensory awareness, it usually would change how you're already interacting with other things with your hand. So if you were already doing this, notice what might have changed for you. Yeah. So that's an example of an indirect procedure, as AT would call it, to access a new way of doing a similar thing. Another way that a teacher might guide you to experience change from your usual habit is, for example, this. Instead of holding a phone, you might just do this. So, taking away the direct stimuli so that you can interact with this mechanical position in a slightly more novel way. So, let's continue with this, right? So, maybe when I do this, it's like, oh, allow your thumbs to be received by the air around you. What does that feel like? And notice that your arm is a part of the rest of your body, connected through your elbow, your upper arm, your shoulders, your torso, and then pouring through all the way to your sitting bones or feet if you're standing right now. How does that change the suppleness in your hand? And then at this point, a teacher might bring, instead of a phone, they might give you like, I don't know, like a lighter thing. Okay, imagine this is a lighter thing and place it in your hand and be like, okay, let's check in with what came online as you receive this item. So for me, right now, I noticed that I'm clamping down a little bit. So a teacher might say, oh, notice the weight of the object in your hands. What is it? What could it be like to let that trickle through your arm? Hmm. So instead of me actively holding it up, I let it come towards me, letting gravity receive it. And then that in turn changes my supposed bad habit. But it's not a bad habit, it's just a habit that does not serve me so well. Of course, the word bad, it's a little bit moralistic, but in this way we can think of it as not as mechanically advantageous. I hope I'm not rambling too much. Let's see where else we can go. I am gonna let my interest guide me, just like from my earlier video. Let's see. Okay, so another part that interests me is I have this part where I say A, B, C. Let's see what I'm trying to do here. A says, how long and wide can I be? B says, inhibition in stasis, in movement, and in standing. How do I interact with my music, or can I give it space? And then C is using the moments of stopping to give yourself direction. I don't compute, yeah. I know I wrote this, but sometimes when I read my past notes, I'm like, damn, what was I trying to do? Or what was I trying to understand? This sounds like it might have been a process that I was brought through in the class. There's so much in this. It's so dense. Oh my god. Okay, after pondering, right, I think in some ways I was outlining a more typical learning process in AT life, whereby you start with the task that you are exploring. And then you insert this curiosity of how can I invite a different state of being? Therefore, A, how long and what can I be? And then before you start doing the task, you offer a moment of pause, which they call inhibition, whether it's in stasis or in movement, to stop and be aware of what might be coming online. And in that moment of pause, you give yourself a new direction. I would like my back to be long and wide as I inhale. And you repeat that like so many times in a very stretched out way before that becomes more of a newly learned habit. It takes time because it's unfamiliar and new, and all these habits that we have learned and built up become so second nature that it's just like split second. The thing about habits, right, is that they are useful because we don't want to go about our life every single moment needing to decide how to touch our toothbrush before lifting the toothbrush off to bring it to our mouth and then putting it onto our teeth. You know, that's just gonna be a lot of stimuli to deal with daily. So habits are great. There's a reason why we have them. What's not so great is when it stands in the way of the fullness with which we would like to do something, especially for performers. Our goal, hopefully, is to express with some kind of exuberance, fullness, and resonance, or in regular life, to be able to move through life without too much pain and with a lot more joy and energy and with vitality and health, right? So that's when we might want to look at our lifestyle choices or habits that have collected over the years to be like, how can I make it lighter for myself? Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to say. If I'm editing this and I'm like, it's damn rambly, I'm just gonna cut it out lah, huh? What else is interesting to me? Okay, this is also interesting to me. I see on the second page, body well-being plus awareness, infinity sign, overall efficiency in our use of body, and the more Spielbewegung. I need to check what Spielbewegung means. Uh, yeah. So, I did look up Spielbewegung in my original video, but I'm not so happy with how I expressed it. So here's a draft too, since this channel is for me to practice speaking. I couldn't find an exact definition, so it's probably just a compound word of Spiel, which means play, Bewegung, which means movement. So I'm guessing my teacher Andrea back then was trying to say like the way in which you move through the world and interact with the world in a play way. What I did find was that this word might have originated during the Nazi time. So now I'm really curious why she used this word. And I can't verify it because my German's not good enough to understand all these articles, unfortunately. What I do want to respond to is my notes here, right? Even though in my experience of AT, teachers don't talk directly about how well-being happens from a nervous system point of view, they do encourage us to explore ways that we can do activities in a slower fashion, first and foremost. Reason being that in this very modern pace that we live in, we tend to do things fast for efficiency, trying to cram many things into the same amount of time. And that inherently can create a lot of tension and holding patterns, as well as psycho emotional states of being that feels more urgent and hurried. Therefore, in just suggesting that someone slows an activity down or inserts pauses between activities, that already creates an environment that shows your nervous system like, hey, things are okay. We don't have to chiong or rush to get that thing done. We are safe, or we can be safe. That said, even though body well-being can be a byproduct of AT sessions, I think whether or not that comes through, and therefore how much it can affect the overall efficiency in our use of body and the command of movement, would depend on several things. The first one being the way that the AT teacher approaches hands-on and verbal directions in session. Secondly, the AT students' learning needs and their own receptivity to all these novel stimuli and suggestions. And thirdly, the relationship and rapport between the AT teacher and the AT student. I'll probably need to make a separate video about like the conditions that shapes our well-being as a living organism. But what I do want to say is that some teachers I've worked with tend to treat the student before them or the person before them as like sensory data instead of remembering all the cultural background, personhood, life struggles, life happenings that they are experiencing. And they might ask of the student way too much for the current day's capacity. I shall leave that there and return to this maybe in a future video. But for now, my main video, I did talk about the awareness part of this note. So let's head back. Where I used to be in 2016, when I encountered AT for the first time, I didn't even know that you can learn singing by learning about parts that your air doesn't go to directly. For example, right, a big part of my lesson with Andrea was when I was singing a song by Schubert, and I had issues singing a 4-bar phrase. I just kept needing to breathe at a 2-bar phrase. And I was like, why is that the case? I'm singing for less than 5 seconds and I'm out of breath. That can't be. Then she asked me, would you mind taking off your shoes? And then I'm like, what? Sure. Then she's like, are you okay if I touch your feet and toes? And I'm like, we're in Singapore, man. Like, it's damn humid. I sweat damn a lot. Like, you want to touch my feet? Can lah. But, like, are you okay with that? And she's like, yeah, I'm okay with that. So I said, yes. So she places her hands on my toes and feet and says, like, okay, go for that phrase again. And magically, I could sing the whole 4 bars without needing a breath. And I had more breath to spare. It was so crazy. I wish that I had the recording from that session, but I don't anymore. It just blew my mind. That was really the moment where I was like, I need to learn more about AT, because how is it that I've been struggling with this and my voice teacher, who is supposedly really experienced, can't help me with it? How this relates to this phrase is that, firstly, her putting her hands on my feet made me aware that my feet could be soft, they could stay with the floor. I wasn't consciously aware of it that time, but my nervous system was. And the more she stayed with my feet, the more I could release into my support. And even when she removed her hands, I could somehow carry that new possibility into how I sang. She didn't use any words, she just used touch. And that's a very interesting way of how we as sensory beings can respond to invitations to experience something new. First, by having the support we need to do that thing that might feel out of our capacity otherwise. And why body well-being and awareness is related to this is, for example, imagine if you have not eaten and drunk in the last half a day and you are getting really hungry and thirsty. Your body's primary goal is to survive right now. It's not gonna value learning a new skill of how do you sing for 20 seconds instead of 10 seconds, or how do you carry that bag with less propensity for pain. All it cares about is, am I gonna die? Right? So, caring for our well being is a very huge step to then make ourselves more resourced to then try new and unfamiliar things. This is something that I have folded into my own practice a lot, that I feel that in AT, in its traditional way and how it's being taught and shown in trainings, is not as holistic in. I'm sure there might be some trainings out there that can do that, but that's from my experience and my understanding from talking to other people. Okay. So that's the first thing, that well being creates the environment for you to experience something new and unfamiliar, which I talk about in my previous video on how do I make things easier for myself. Second thing, of awareness. Awareness creates the environment for for new possibilities to happen. Awareness also gives you information about what is happening and what isn't happening. It's a really powerful state of being that we can tap into through various means that can then, well, I want to say create change, which is very generic, but um, that can give you more autonomy and agency on how you approach life. In my most recent video haul, I was talking about how I was trying to make videos on how to hone and grow your awareness. That's why I think it's so important for us to have little ways to develop this skill, because we are only gonna be on this earth for like 60 to 100 years. Some of us are not as lucky and may leave earlier. But for those 6 to 10 decades we're alive, hopefully we do it in ways that is in alignment with ourselves, that helps us feel connected to other people, that's meaningful in whatever ways that means for our being. I feel like I'm deviating a little bit from this point, but let's go back to the last point, that well-being and awareness is related to the overall efficiency in our use of body and more command of movement possibilities. When we care for our sensory or our whole organism, and we are aware of what's happening, what isn't happening, what could happen, we can then figure out ways to kind of like hack how we move to be more efficient. Meaning, efficient means less energy for more output, or less resources spent for maximum output. Yeah. In some ways, this can be pushed to very capitalistic extremes, which is not something that I'm a big fan of. I'm not a fan of at all. Clarification. So, this note that I made, I don't know where it brought me back then in 2016, but now me, I really agree with it. This video is probably like 25 minutes long, so I think I should stop here and do a quick debrief on how that felt to read parts of my old beginner self's perspectives. Wow. Obviously, because I just made notes after the session, I don't think I knew how to make sense of them in a way that could be replicated in my own time yet, but they were notes for future me to continue investigating and um, learning from, which I'm so grateful for. And there are things here that have such huge nuggets of wisdom that I'm really happy to see has become an integral part of me now. Uh, yeah. What looking at this has shown me is also that where I am now, even though I have left formal training and I don't have a certification to speak of, AT has really been folded into my outlook of life and life philosophy that is very hard to tell when it's AT, when it's me, and when it's something else that could have come from, for example, therapy, psychosomatic practices, talking with friends, reading, doing life, making mistakes. It's so hard to tell. And that's heartening because preferably techniques don't just stay cognitive or as theory, but as lived experience, as something that transmutes into how you can move in life. Yeah. This is a very different video from my past few videos in the sense that I let myself wander a lot more into different areas. And if you're watching till now, thank you for watching. If you have any thoughts and questions about what I've said, I'd love to hear it in the comments. Mm, yeah. Moving forward from here, I do wish to share more of what I've learned through AT and other psychosomatic practices with people through online content, but to be very honest, I don't know how because I'm afraid that if I put a label, for example, AT on it, people from the community might bash me, feel that I'm unethical, or people might think that all that I say is AT, but it's not. I don't want to misrepresent it. Heck no. And then also, I'm concerned that I'm not making sense, which is hard for me to admit because I'm a professional who works with people in these regards, not in AT, but adjacent ways. But in the same way that resources online and books that I've read have helped me find alternatives of living and being that have made me excited to live, I hope that me sharing things like that can open that for someone else as well. Yeah. So that's all for today's video. Thank you for watching, and we'll see where my curiosity brings me in the next video. I feel like I'm gonna do the sensory wellness and care in Singapore thing because that's been coming up a lot in my own life, my social circles, and I've been seeing it online quite a bit. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. See you again. Bye.